Good morning, everyone. My name is Tommy Johnson, and I'm with the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to IT Basics for Business. This is a new quarterly breakfast seminar series, which provides a forum to gain useful, do-it-yourself IT solutions and insightful, actionable tips. And I really want to thank our friends at Uprise Partners for allowing us to bring you this virtual event series for the entire season. I'd like to welcome you all to this first installment of the IT Basics for Business for the calendar year 22-23. This four-part, bi-monthly, season-long series will run from now through June. Today's topic, 4 IT Essentials for a Successful Business, is presented by Brian Gagnon, Chief Technology Officer at Uprise Partners. They are a Maine-based technology company building value for small and medium-sized businesses through exceptional IT, software engineering, and marketing. Their vision is for companies of every size in every industry to be able to focus on what they do, create, innovate, and grow, bolstered by seamlessly functioning systems and applications. Now, like all the Chamber's virtual signature events, today's presentation is free and will be recorded and made available for free replay on the Chamber's website and YouTube page. And I do encourage you, if you have some friends that maybe were unable to register or get here on time for today's live presentation, be sure to watch it on the replay over on the YouTube page. To keep up to date on all the Chamber's news and events, please visit our website, portlandregion.com, and check out our events page and sign up for our weekly events email newsletter while you're there. Before we get to today's presentation, I'm proud to share that we're using a newer platform, StreamYard, for all of our virtual Chamber events. This platform provides many improved production and interaction elements that I think you'll be really happy to see. I'd also like to remind you that if you have a question for our presenter, please type them into the YouTube chat, and they'll be relayed to Brian throughout the presentation. And we'll also save some time at the end for more Q&A as we conclude. Now, at this point, I'd like to acknowledge our presenting sponsor of IT Basics for Business, Uprise Partners. Since joining the Chamber just over a year ago, Uprise Partners has been an active participant at many Chamber events and is our newest partner for this signature event series. They will be the sole sponsor and content facilitator for the entire season. And at this time, I'd like to invite Chief Executive Officer Melinda Gagnon to say a few words.
Good morning, Tommy. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to sponsor the series, and our year with the Chamber has been fantastic. So thank you for all you guys do. Want to tell you just a really quick overview of Uprise. Tommy did a fantastic job earlier. A little bit more about what we specialize in. So Uprise Partners specializes in cybersecurity and IT managed services. We're based right here in Maine, and we have customers across the U.S. We're fortunate that the last 2 years, we've been named one of the top 100 security firms in North America and one of the top 500 managed service providers in North America. So really happy to be here in Maine, growing a team in Maine, and supporting Maine businesses. So if you want to learn more about us, you can check out our website. It's uprisepartners.com. We'd love to chat with you about anything regarding business challenges, business growth. We love solving business problems with technology. That's what we're all about. So thanks, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Melinda. And I can tell you, Melinda and Brian have just been great to work with. So if you get a chance and have any other follow-up questions, I do encourage you to reach out to both of them. So let's get on to our presentation. With us today is Brian Gagnon, a man who is a Chief Technology Officer at an IT company. I'm so intimidated already. Brian is a technologist with 25 years of experience building, scaling, and optimizing business ecosystems. He's the CTO of Uprise Partners and has served as the head of global systems engineering at HGST, Western Digital, and was a global architect at VMware and has built and led several tech companies. He specializes in cybersecurity, tech infrastructure design, public, private, and hybrid cloud architecture, data management practices, and data science platforms. He's also a mentor with TechStars and Mass Challenge. Whew. Brian, take it away.
All right. Well, hey, thank you very much, Tommy, and thank you, Melinda, for introducing me. Always great when my better half can give me a nice pitch to start for the morning. And so let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity and just technology in general. And what I would say is, Tommy, please don't be intimidated. The whole purpose of this morning in this seminar is really to talk about making technology more approachable in how you talk about business, not how we talk about business. And so to really exemplify that, I want to start off and say, hey, you know what? We all love geeks. We're all geeks at heart sometimes. Some of us more than others. This has been my craft, and I'm okay being a geek at times. But what I would say is tech isn't really for geeks anymore, and that we all have to understand it because it's so critical to our business. And I don't need to harp on the fact that over the last couple of years, a lot has changed, and many of our businesses went from being, maybe bricks and mortar or had less components that were technology based to really a digital infrastructure that many of us have had to support to keep our business alive or keep our business moving forward. So, with all that being said, we have to all think about how we talk about technology. Um, Us from the tech side, you from running a business side and having your craft, right? And really understanding that. And so what I wanted to do today is this might be a little bit different. If you're a geek and you're in the audience, you may not actually find much value from this per se. If you think that I'm going to talk about all of the buzzwords in technology, I'm not. I want to arm people with businesses that need to know about technology with terms and sentences and things to think about that are actually much less geeky, much less technology based, but actually gets to the right questions that you should be asking. So we're going to go over 4 really good, let's call them framework, right? 4 different framework pieces that get you armed with the right questions that you should be asking when you're dealing with either your internal tech person, somebody external, you name it. So if you think about it, these are things that somebody from an IT company or possibly your own internal IT person might say, right? And I'm sure many people probably just automatically glassed over and maybe don't understand what all these things mean. And what I would say is this is a problem with technology over the last 20 or 30 years. Um, Unfortunately, my craft has done, we've gotten really excited about technology, but we haven't always done great at bringing people along on the journey and making sure that people understand how technology could be approachable and talking about, you're going to need MFA and EDR and all these things to be secure, or, you really need to make these backups immutable, and we're going to need to put those hybrid in the cloud and all these things. We can absolutely talk that way at times, but for many business owners, that's daunting, right? And that doesn't necessarily take you on the journey because you're thinking about, okay, we need to get our cost of goods down, or we need to figure out supply chain and make that more productive. Is there some way we can leverage technology for that? Those are the types of things that are going through your head, not, hey, we need to move the domain controller to AWS or any number of other buzzwords. That's not as meaningful because that doesn't actually get to the core of the matter of what you're trying to do with your business. So these are just a couple, right? So let's reframe these questions together. And so asking things like, and these are great questions to arm yourself with, right? And I would say, try this out, right? These are pretty quick, small little sound bites, but are we confident that we're doing all that we can to secure our organization? That question is going to open up different possibilities with the IT people that you're speaking with, because what that's saying to them is, hey, talk about a lot of the different things that we could do. And just like you do with everything else in business, you need to probably apply some rigor of how far you go and where you have to mitigate. So the good news is you actually will be talking on a very similar talk track, right? And with that being said, when you start to ask questions a little differently and saying, no, you're actually talking about too much of the technology tidbits. Can you come back to me and let's talk about these couple things, right? Because I want to know it from the business perspective. And then I'm going to ask more questions. I want you to come up with a solution that maps to what we're talking about and what we're after. Because That's much, much more, important. Understanding what happens if there is a data breach, or if you lose data, or somebody accidentally deletes data. Those are important things to understand that don't have a whole lot of technology wrapped into it, but it has the things that your business needs, right? And so this is just a sample, right? This is the old way. Things that people like me have said in my younger career before I started to figure out that not everybody understood what the heck I was saying. This is how I would have talked to you. Guilty, right? I would have had some Raspberry Pi cool thing that I was building, and I would probably be all excited about it. I'd tell you about it, and you would glass over rightfully. And just like there's probably things in your craft that you do the same. And I'm like, wow, they were really excited about whatever. And then I would have to probably go research it myself because I am curious and an engineer. So transforming to this, what I would say is this is a great first step, because this makes it more about your business and a little bit less about technology, but it gets us to a good place. And I think everybody can understand this and kind of work around this. Now, with this being said, when you transform how you speak about tech and the things that you know about tech, you do have to be careful, right? Because this is very open-ended questioning. And there's a couple things that are probably missing from this. Budget being one of them, flexibility being another one, resiliency, And so when we think about the 4 essentials, sure, I could give you 4 questions to ask or 4, buzzwords, but the reality of it is this is the boiled down version of what IT is all about, right? Maybe it's open for debate. I don't think that it is. If you think about owning a business, you want it to be secure. If you have a warehouse, forget technology. You need to know that your warehouse is secure and that not anybody could walk in off the street and take things. You want to make sure that you can control inventory and that you can actually calculate that into some meaningful financial results. You want to make sure that from a perspective of everybody being able to do their jobs with technology, their laptops work and they have applications that make their lives easier. So with all of that being said, these are the things of what is really, really critical. So starting with security, obviously that's in the news. It's a buzzword a little bit if it's not taken seriously and if it's not understood at the business level. And so when I say that, security really helps set the foundation, because there's a minimum that we need, and we need to continuously be improving security. So it's really, really critical. That's not something that you can just sort of, half end it, right? And so with that being said, resiliency is the the cousin of that. Sorry, I just lost video on my side, but we will keep rolling. And so when we think about resiliency, resiliency is the act of when something happens, how quickly we can recover. So one thing I like to say about security is it's really not enough, or there really is, it's very hard to get to the point that everything is 100% secure, right? And with that being said, we have to have some resiliency so that we can recover from the inevitable. It might be a server dies, it might be somebody deletes a file, or what have you. We need to be able to be resilient from that. Experience. When you think about experience, that word can have a lot of different meanings. In this meaning, if you think about technology, technology has to be accessible. I've heard a lot of people say, hey, this is great. I'm really glad you implemented this security, but this is really hard and everybody is struggling and it's taking a really long time and they're not able to do their jobs. They're not productive. This doesn't seem resilient. It seems very hard to recover from, or what have you. So when we think about experience, we're talking about user experience. And it's really important. It's the number one thing that will block you from some of your projects. So something that absolutely needs to be considered. Now, like everything on this, there's give and take. So we may have to shift back and forth. Now, with that being said, productivity is, as you notice, the bottom row are sort of, they're a little bit nice to haves, but they're also things that have to have considerations in resiliency and security. There are some trade-offs that will probably have to be made. So with that being said, productivity is absolutely important with technology, but it has to sort of be implemented correctly so that it's not full productivity. There's no way to maintain what has been put together and it's not secure. That's not real helpful. So, as we get to, and let's dive into these a little bit deeper, security is incredibly important in the small to medium-sized business. Over the last 2 years, we have seen an incredible uptick of security-related incidents that have put businesses out of business. And when you think about the fact that the average company that has not recovered from a security event in a 2-week time period, 80% of those, in a lot of cases, go out of business because they just cannot tolerate that time for recovery and all of the things that have to happen for that. When you look at things like the average is 9.5 million, what that says, and I have a lot of people say, well, how could that be? We don't make $9.5 million a year. The reality to that is you're right, but that doesn't mean that all of the costs don't add up to more than what you make in a year. And that is the definition of, having a real hard time running a business when you make more than, or when it costs more than what you make. So that's why we see those staggering numbers, because this number is going up, and it's not just, hey, turn all my stuff back on from a ransomware attack. It is, hey, we need to actually do public relations. We need to talk to all of our customers and make sure that, we mitigate any of the risks to them. We maybe need to take action that gets things secure again and does root cause analysis. All of those things are sort of in the back end that are actually really expensive to do correctly. So when we think about that, let's talk about, here's the key to consider. This is a really great question to reframe when you're talking to a technologist, right? How can we ensure that we have appropriate security controls and policies to protect our core business assets? That gets right to the core of it, right? That gets right to the things that you really want to know. You don't necessarily need to know about EDR and all those other things I said, but this is a question that you, as a business owner, a leader, a manager, or what have you, you really want to get to the core of this and understand what exactly is going on to protect our assets. And you want to ask questions. Great. How is that documented? If we had a breach, how would we use this technology that you're proposing to be able to recover from that? Awesome. Does this do anything if I have to do reporting to my customers, right? These aren't necessarily technical questions, but these will definitely make IT professionals dance, because it's changing it a little bit. It's putting it in your terms and things that you need for your business. And so now when we think about resiliency, like I said, secure anything 100% isn't possible. I think it was Dwight Eisenhower that once said that if you want 100% freedom, the place for you is jail, because you get 3 hot meals a day and a bed, and bars to keep you safe. The reality of that is that doesn't happen in technology, because now when we start looking at the 4 boxes that I gave you that are the essentials, how are we going to meet a customer experience situation? In jail, you're probably not going to be able to ask for what you want for a meal. Probably not going to get some Halo top or something something from the outside, unless you got a pretty good connection with the guards. But the reality of it is, to have that, resilience, you have to be ready for the inevitable. You have to be ready for the things that may happen. And security events don't just happen to medium or large companies. Unfortunately, they happen a lot to smaller companies because they might not have the resources. And criminals understand this. So when we think about that, having a strong disaster recovery plan, having some business continuity planning. What happens if you have a point of sale? What happens if your credit card machine goes out? Do you pull out the old cha-chunk, right? Or you probably have something that if the power goes out, you don't just shut off business. We need to do the same things with some of your really important data as well. So let's have that conversation and figure out what risks you could tolerate, how long you could tolerate them, because we can't tolerate everything forever, and really come up with a plan of what the recovery looks like to get back to normalcy. And so with this, I'm giving you a couple other questions here, but this just sort of arms you with the flavor of questions that really gets to a good place. So, do you have a plan to keep your business resilient, right? And in the loss of a breach, really important to understand. How often do you test your plans, right? That is a really important question. A lot of the people in the last year that we've spoken to in the course of, talking to new clients and such, hadn't done this part. They did the first part and they had a really great disaster recovery plan. But then when we dug in and said, okay, what happens if this happens? Let's do a sample test and try to recover something and make sure that we could get it back in the time frame that you were thinking. And a lot of times that test plan didn't exist. So that's not a technical question, but it's a really important question. And oh, by the way, if you've created a test plan, that's amazing. That's a great first step. But this is just like everything in life. Stuff changes over time and you have to modernize. And with test plans and disaster plans and resiliency planning, it needs to be updated on a regular basis to make sure that it still meets the needs of what your business needs, right? And, the other piece is, how quickly can you get back? Not everything needs to come back right away. Your email, for instance, that's an emotional piece of many people's businesses where, who hasn't said the email's down or the email's down, right? A lot of people. The reality is, though, if you were in a tough spot, would you pick that over potentially your point of sale system? You probably would want to get point of sale back up so that you could take orders again and keep the money flowing. So just things to think about, that not everything in your business is going to be ranked the same when you get to resilience, because you may have to make trade-offs so that you get the most important stuff back in a reasonable manner. And so now when we talk about experience, I think this is a really great example, right? This is where users and employees of your company, you put some new security thing, or your IT team puts something new in place for security, and it doesn't really hit the mark. And so what happens is people will eventually figure out how to go to the left of this gate. And while that gate costs you a lot of money and it sounds really good that you have a side gate, the reality is just right over there to the left, you're one, hopscotch right up over that shorter fence. And that's not necessarily helping your productivity. Well, it is, because people figured their way around it. But the reality is you don't have the level of security that you think, and you maybe had a period of time where productivity suffered and people got creative, right? I actually applaud this. So in IT, when I see things like this and I see where somebody's done the end around, it's actually, pretty funny to me, because it's people getting crafty and figuring out how to get productive. Who doesn't like that? Now, the problem is you've probably spent a lot of money to get that really nice fence that everybody's going around. So a couple questions. I'm going to answer these live in real time. So one question that we have, all right. All right. No, actually, sorry. That was a question from the internal team. I apologize. So when we think of experience really is kind of a judgment of, is the technology working for you, or is it, poorly working, right? And so when we think about it, a really good question is, how will this new technology implementation, how is that going to affect the experience of our employees, right? Because we need to make sure we maintain productivity. And as a result of that, let's make sure we have a good experience. It's definitely a question that you should ask. It's often forgotten. It's often maybe assumed that there's going to be a good experience. And if you don't have that conversation prior to putting something in place, there's a really good chance that you may miss the mark. Have a conversation around that. So I'm going to pause for questions for a sec. Does anybody have any questions? I've kind of gone through a good piece of this, and I would love to have some questions if you have some out there. All right. Well, we actually have a whole bunch, and me being the technologist, I was on the wrong screen for that. So I'm now seeing that we had a number of those, but that's okay. I know how to self-deprecate on things like that. So, all right.
Yeah, Brian, looks like the first question that came from the group, of the 4 essentials, I know you're going through each of them right now. We're about halfway through. Of those 4, which can and maybe which should be gathered first? Some of those, obviously, experience takes time, but of some of those, whether it be productivity, are there some that you can control and get after a little earlier in the process?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. What I would say is, if you look at those 4, there's a reason that I sort of put them in the orientation. It's super easy. Go across the horizontal line and everything above the line, security and resiliency. If you don't know where to start, that's probably a great place to start and ask the questions. Those are the things that are going to help you most to make sure that, your business is there, right? Obviously, productivity and user experience is really important, but those ones are just a little bit more important to get started. And then we can always circle to, below the line, so to speak. It's a great question.
And then we had another question. The same person asked, how often should you revise your IT plan to keep up with modern day scams, things like that?
That's a really great question. So what I would say is, as a general rule of thumb, and everybody's business differs. If your business is really, really dynamic and things are changing all the time, meaning maybe you have an e-commerce business, you're adding new vendors on a really regular basis, you're adding a lot of employees, or maybe you have seasonality and you're removing employees. Those are events that change is going to probably drive a need to have a more regular, modernized approach, right? So something like that might be, hey, we have so much change happening. We maybe need to, look at this every month in our management meeting, ask what has changed, and then validate that, in fact, we are following it, right? Or that we're making changes as needed. What I would say is to get started at a minimum a year, but probably on the half year or maybe the quarter, once you get, the bulk of it done. What I would say is, like most things, it takes a bit to get the first one done, but then after that, you're really doing some updates and you're doing validation to make sure that plan still works. Because what we don't want to do is get to the place where we've got the gate with the gate over to the side that you could skip by, right? So, I would say a year at a minimum, and then make sure you do it and update it, on the year, right? I think that's a good starting point. But if your business is, rife with change, and that's just your model, right? Nothing wrong with that. Might mean that you need to update it more often and put some more controls in place that, maybe even force you on maybe adding a new vendor, right? You add a new vendor, you have some vendor management that you go through, and you validate a number of questions with them before they even become a vendor. So hopefully
Perfect.
that's a good start.
Brian, I'm going to step back into the green room again, let you take the show over, but I will encourage our attendees over there on YouTube. If you have questions for Brian, now's a great time to pose them. Just go ahead and make sure you just type them right into the chat, and I'll make sure that I relay them over to him. So keep it going, Brian.
Hey, why do you get a green room and I don't? I'm kind of saddened by this, but that's okay. Yeah, so if we talk about experience, right, and just kind of tie off on that, experience is really important because experience affects productivity. So those are definitely, the below the line items are really important because they very closely relate to each other. Surprisingly, the above lines also, resiliency and security relate really close as well. And then when you look at them all together, when they all get together, you almost don't feel like you have all this technology because you're doing the right things for your business, and technology is a critical part of your business at that point. It's not a side part of the business that you sort of grumble about when you get the bill. So that's what we want to focus on, is building value and not being kind of a cost center, so to speak. So, another example, Melinda found a lot of these great ones and I just chuckled at them. But, when we really think about like fails and security fails, unfortunately, a lot in IT, I see things like this where it's like, hey, we put the security thing in place, but then there's like some side way around. It was just too good to pass up and put a couple of these out there. So the things that us IT folks laugh about is odd sometimes, quite frankly. So when we get into productivity, this is a pretty staggering number, right? So 22 minutes a day for most people is kind of productivity wasteland. And when you start thinking about that, hey, that's not that much. But when you start to add, a median size, small to medium business, 50 people or so, reasonable size, that adds up incredibly fast when you're wasting that much time on productivity drains, right? So this is definitely something that, as we get some of the other things addressed from a baseline and getting at least good enough security in place where you could kind of continually improve and not worry immediately that you have such a deficiency that you're in the red zone, right? Once we're past that, these are the things that you need to start thinking about, which is how can we start chipping away at this improvement and really getting the experience great where people are gaining productivity and not doing the same things that could easily be done with a little bit of technology. So in when you think about that, again, this is really the time suck, right? There's the things that we design as a business where we think that we're improving technology, but if the experience isn't good, it's not going to affect productivity in the way that we think, and people are going to make the path over to the right. I went to the University of Maine. I remember seeing in the winter where they had the paths that they obviously tarred into the mall that they wanted you to walk across. But then there was always some class that I had that was a perfect diagonal from where I was at that point. And it wasn't just me. And you'd always see the crisscrosses across the mall. And really, nobody walked across the one that just went straight across in the perpendicular. Most everybody has probably seen things like this. This is, productivity and how this is great. Our employees like figure out how to navigate around, things that are productivity sucks. But this is just a great example of, people taking productivity into their own hands. And so when we think about it, a really key question that gets to this really quick is there a function of technology that can cost effectively improve our productivity of what we're currently doing? You don't need to boil the ocean. It doesn't need to be, with our finance system or with our whatever. It could be a lot smaller than that. It could be, given the example of finance, it could be we need to figure out a way, like our invoicing takes a long time. Is there some way that we could cost effectively improve this, even if it's a little bit, right? And can we use technology over time to maybe make this a better scenario where, we're growing so fast, we're going to have to hire another person. Is there a way that we can offset that and put some technology in place that improves the performance and gets us to a better place? This is pretty critical. And when you start asking questions like this, it reframes what you're talking about with technology and how it's leveraged in your business. So how do you get started? So I've given you a couple examples of decently framed business questions versus IT questions. Just get started. Ask some of these questions. If you have an IT person, an IT team, or an IT vendor, start asking some of these questions. You don't have to ask them all, but start with a couple and just feel it out and see what you get for answers. And if the answers that you get feel very opaque, if they feel not transparent or transformative, that's a place where you might have to dig in and ask some additional questions. Example, if you ask the question about security, is this technology or how can we leverage the technology to make sure that our business is as secure as it can be for our core business assets? If you get a lot of technical jargon, you may want to reframe that and say something like, if we don't understand how this affects the business and we could quantify that financially or with losing things, it's going to be really hard for us to accept this technology as something that's going to actually add to us. I'm going to need you to explain it a little bit more with financial understanding, with user experience and how it might affect that, with productivity. Is this going to actually help our productivity, or is this going to maybe remove some productivity, but we just need it? I really need you to explain that to us in non-technical jargon, because it's really critical to our business, but what you just said doesn't actually relate to what I care about in the business. That's a really, really, I think, more empowering way to kind of work through that and talk through that. So that's what I've got. And if you ever have questions, we are happy to help. You send me an email. I don't care. Yes, I'm fairly busy, but I don't love the word busy. So, give me a reason to chat about this. Love to talk about it. Anybody on our team does as well. Let's go into questions. Does anybody have additional questions? It looks like maybe there's a couple more that piled up. But if you got questions, love to chat about it and have a little bit of dialogue. So I'll give it a second for people to type in. Tommy's back from the green room. That's got to be a good thing. All right.
Brian, sorry about that. I was muted. As we're letting some folks get some questions typed into the YouTube chat, I had a question from something you just said a few minutes ago, which
Awesome.
was, in terms of, how do you assess your IT plan and how do you go about doing that? And you mentioned if you have an IT person on site. I'll give you for example, at the chamber, we have a staff of about 7, and we have somebody on our team who serves as sort of the de facto IT person. But what if organizations, in any industry, whether they be in retail or restaurant or manufacturing, you name it. What if they don't have an IT person? I know this might be a leading question, a self-serving question for what you folks do, but what do you do in that situation? If you don't have an IT person or a consultant on staff, what's a good way to even initiate this process and maintain the process?
That's a great question. And it is a self-serving question, so I'm going to dance around it just a little. Everybody knows how to get a hold of us now. So if you want to talk about business and ways that we could help you, happy to. But what I would say is less self-serving. What I would say is you're probably not too small to at least get some advisory from a technologist, or that could be an individual. It could be a company like us. There's many others out there. But what I would say is it's getting increasingly hard, and the Renaissance people of IT probably are all checking out of the business at this point, right? They're probably 30 years in or something like that, and have made a good life for themselves. It's really hard to find people that know all aspects of IT at this point. And so If you have somebody on staff that is sort of doing de facto IT, let's just say that's hard all by itself, because every day that you're working on that and you maybe have half your time or 3/4 of your time into it, it's really difficult to stay current if you're only in one location, if you're only at one company. So that's piece one. Piece two is, this is evolving and moving so fast. A do nothing strategy is also not a great idea. It may seem daunting at the smaller scale when you're 2 or 3. Maybe you've got to make do because there is a place where finances do rub up against that quite heavily, and it's just harder to get what you need. But what I would say is, talk to somebody, right? Get an understanding of even just the basics. Watch these webinars, ask questions. That helps. That's a good starting point. As you start to get, a little bit more scale in your business and you start to get up above, a couple people, what I would say is you probably want to engage somebody that, has a team of people that has all the different specialities, because there are quite a few of them. Obviously, when you're smaller, you may have smaller needs. You may only be able to afford smaller needs. But at least look around and try to find somebody that can help you with this stuff, because just like you probably wouldn't try to extract a tooth yourself, this stuff has started to get complicated, and you want to make sure you at least get a consult on where to go from there. So I think that's a good place. If you're in a larger business where now you're 10, 20, 50, 100 people, if you've got, and I would say at that point, you kind of have a new set of problems. Many people have a singular IT person. That doesn't scale very well at larger scales, right? Because things like documentation, things like rigor, and the fact that you actually have to go on a vacation and have a life. Buses circulate around, and unfortunately they don't stop sometimes. Don't mean to make that grim, but that's one thing that we always talk about is resiliency of our team and sort of our offering is, accidents happen, bad things happen. And if technology is so critical to your business and it's wrapped up in one person's mind who might be so busy legitimately that they don't have time to maybe proper document, is that a risk all to itself? So I just give you a couple things to think about at different sizes. If you're in that 10 to 100 plus range and you have a single IT person, you probably have a risk just in that. If you are in the under 10 and you're not talking to at least somebody, even if it's somebody that you can't afford all the time, it's better than nothing. And it's going to, probably get you to that point so that, they may refer. Actually, great question. If you asked me right now, hey, I have a under 10 person business and we don't have a huge IT budget, but we know we need to do some things. What are the things that you would tell me to do? Make sure you have backups, that actually get written somewhere and maybe don't get deleted. Make sure that you have some of the security controls. If you're using Google or using O365 Microsoft, make sure that the basic settings are turned on for the most part. That's going to protect you decently with the default settings. And then, outside of that, productivity and user experience, you're going to probably have to, take some sacrifices there, and you may cause some things that, maybe aren't as productive. But as long as you're sort of thinking about the first two, and you're thinking about also what happens if something goes away, right? What happens if this file or my HubSpot gets deleted? If the answer is we're going to have a real tough go at this and it's all over, then what I would say is call up HubSpot and call up your HubSpot rep. I'm just using that as an example, and say, what is something basic that we could do to at least just get a copy of our data so that we're not completely stranded and basically out of business, right? A vendor would absolutely give you something like that. Also, potentially go out and read a couple forums, use some of the terms that I told you, and then maybe apply it to a technology that that you're using, you may get a good enough answer that's better than do nothing. So hopefully that helps people in both directions.
Yeah, Brian, that's great to know, and you segued perfectly, whether you knew it or not, into sort of the next question that got teed up. The question is, what is a good way to approach IT security for remote workers as that company grows from 10 to 20 to 50 employees? Like many of us today, I'm working from the attic, and you're working from the studio, and we've got people all over the state of Maine and everywhere working remotely. What's a great way to approach security for those folks who are remote?
So great question. What I would say is I think we can all hopefully accept that the last 2 years, it's almost 3 years at this point, IT was actually forced upon us because we had to do it to adapt, right? And so many companies, we didn't have this problem. Our whole team was remote before that. So one day we just literally said, hey, don't come to the office until we figure out what's going on. So that was easy for us because we built it that way. But if you were a business that all of a sudden found yourself with people working remote really quickly, what I would say is that actually is, if you haven't revisited your security approach to remote workers, that's something you definitely want to do, right? That's that modernization of your plan. And so what I would say is really great way to think about it. Whenever you make those changes, you should always circle back and validate, hey, is this working the way that we thought? Is this scaling the way that we thought? And is it secure? If you haven't had a security audit or an assessment, probably a great time to do that. They're not like super high cost, and it's something that can give you a bit of a checkup, right? So I think that's part of it. With the approach to remote work, what I would say is the technology is there to make remote work happen. It has been. Melinda and I have worked remote for almost 15 years, right? And so kind of have it down. What I would say, I've never actually been hung up by the technology pretty much at any company. What I've been hung up by is policy and the people that implement it. So if you think about technology, the things that are actually challenging with security compliance for remote workers is actually the policy itself and coming up with a policy that makes sense. Not everybody is a great remote worker. There, I said it, right? And that's part of it. Sometimes you can adjust that with policy. Sometimes you can adjust that with expectations, but that's not necessarily a technology adjustment. You can put nanny software in place where you audit things and look at things and do that. You're going to probably have a bad customer or bad, user experience with that if that is what you use to manage performance, right? So those aren't technology problems. Those are policy, acceptance from the workforce of how it helps them and how they could get their jobs done and what your expectations are with what they have to do for their job. So I think that stuff is really important, and making sure that that is in your security approach. As far as things like VPN and all of the buzzwords, right? VPN, zero trust, you name it. What I would say is if you think about this like a castle, and we actually wrote a blog about this that we can put in the links. When you think about trust no one, trust nothing, and you start from there, well, that sounds not very friendly. There's parts of business that everybody doesn't need access to. We don't allow everybody to have access to all the financials, right? And there's a reason for that. It's not that we don't trust people. It's just that's not in their role. So when we start thinking about roles-based security, that applies out to the person in the Starbucks. That applies to Tommy in his attic, right? I'm sure it's a great attic too. So, nothing wrong would ever happen there. But with that being said, when we think about that, we need to have considerations that maybe if we take a position that not everything is trusted by default and people only get access to just the things they need, that actually puts your business in a much higher security posture, just by doing that, because not everybody needs access to, with the castle, right? If you get in the front gate, and the only place that you check someone's, ID is at the front gate, hey, they might have gotten through and now they're in, and they might be doing some nefarious in the armory, for instance, or they may be over in the cantina, like making snacks when that wasn't what they were there to do, right? So I say that, and that thinking like that and having an approach that doesn't just involve, let's cut a hole in our firewall and just let people through because we have to, and that's like our new business imperative. The reality of that is you want to come up with a plan that gives people just enough, lets them do what they need to do, lets them be productive, and lets them have a great user experience. Right back to it, right? So that's how I would start that conversation.
Brian, we've got time for what looks like one more question that came through, and it's kind of a two-part question. But and you may have mentioned this already. I heard you say VPN, which I'm familiar with, even though I am a tech dummy. But the question is, what security compliance frameworks do you support? And then maybe further to that is, which compliance framework should business owners be considering?
Right. Great question. A lot of talk about this. Again, we get into buzzword, and we hear a lot of buzzword where a vendor might say, if you're doing something in a regulated space, banking, healthcare, anything with PII, personal information. Sorry, I got to put a dollar in the acronym jar. Something with the government. Those are three pretty clear areas where you're going to run into compliance and regulation. The other one, if you're doing e-commerce or you have bricks and mortar, you now fall into PCI compliance for the credit card industry. So we deal with all of those, right? Everything from NIST, which is National Institute of Science and Technology. That is kind of a framework that gets you more secure. We do NIST assessments all day long. Again, there are ISO, if you follow ISO standards, there's also ISO standards. ISO is a lot more forceful in what it says that you need to do to get ISO compliant for 27001. Don't expect you to remember that. I barely do. But with that being said, these frameworks are really meant to guide you in the way that you need to think about it from a business perspective, not necessarily the technology perspective. So what I would say is we support the majority of frameworks. We don't own the frameworks, or we don't own the compliance. No one does, except for maybe the agency or the person that's helping you self-attest. But with that being said, we can help you with any of those different frameworks because really all it is just that. It's a framework. And for the most part, we're following the same controls, whether you're small or large. If you either decide that you want to start to use that as a lever to get yourself more secure, that's a great thing. If you decide that, or a vendor decides for you, hey, based on risk and controls that we're actually assessing, we need you as a vendor to assure that we are going to have a secure relationship together and understand that if something goes wrong, resilience, that you have a plan to help us get back on our feet for the critical thing that we're getting from you. So when you think about those things, that's definitely stuff that we can help you with. So there is no magic bullet, though, for a compliance framework or infrastructure. Just, yeah.
Yeah, when we say that all the time, there's no two businesses alike, and I'm sure everyone's IT situation is different as well. Well, great presentation, Brian. Again, thank you so much. I learned some things today, and wasn't too overwhelming. So I'm sure to learn more over the course of the next 6-7 months, over the course of the next 3 episodes that we do. But again, thank you, Brian, and thank you to our chamber staff for helping produce another successful event today.
Hey, Tommy.
And thank you to each of you for attending today and throughout this year coming up. If you're interested in learning more about IT essentials for a successful business, be sure to check your email. A follow-up message will come out with links to additional resources. Another shout out to our sponsor, Uprise Partners, for their support of the IT Basics for Business series. We look forward to seeing you again in February when we hear from Brian and his team on the topic specifically of cybersecurity. The IT Basics for Business series is typically held on the first or second Tuesday every other month. through June at 8 a.m. So with that, have a wonderful rest of your day, stay warm, and enjoy this holiday season.